Hello, Ubaldo Acosta greets you. Welcome again. I hope you're ready to start with this lesson. We're going to study the subject of objects in Java. This is the basis of object-oriented programming. Are you ready? Okay, let's go. Objects in Java. We already defined the class person, but we need to create objects in order to use this class. So we need to create some objects, for example, Rita or Steve. An object is the instance of a class. That is to say that from our template, it is possible to create concrete objects with which we can work. That is, change its values and call his methods. Later, we will see that there are cases in which we can work directly with the class. This is called static context. But for now, we will be studying the dynamic context. That is, we need to create an instance of a class to be able to work with them. As we can see in the figure, we have the person class, and from this template, we can create concrete objects to be able to work with their characteristics and attributes. For example, we have created two objects of type person, and each one has similar characteristics but with different values. The characteristics are, for example, name, last name, gender, schooling, etc. And each one of the objects is assigned these characteristics. In this way, the class serves us only to indicate what characteristics the object we are going to create will have. Let's see now the syntax to create an object. Creating a person object in Java. To define an object, we are going to use the reserved word new. So we can see in the code that we first define a variable. In this case, the variable p1 of type person. After that, we use the reserved word new. This word in Java means, in simple terms, that we are going to create a new variable of type person. So in order to create an object, we need to use this reserved word. And after that, we indicate which class we're going to use. So with this syntax, we will create a new object of type person and assign the reference of this object to the variable p1. So after this line is executed, the variable p1 will be able to access an object of type person. Each time that the word new is called, a new object of type person will be created, and it will contain its own values. We can modify the values of the object. In this case, we use the variable p1, and we can access the attributes using the dot operator. So we can use p1.id equals to 1. And the first name equals to Rita. And last name is equals to Brown. After that, we close the main method and we close the person test class. In later lessons, we will see in more technical terms what the word new does. But for this lesson, it's enough to know that it allows us to create new objects. More of the word new. We're going to see an example of what we have done until this point. So we first declare a variable p1, and the effect on the memory is that the variable p1 is created. Until this point, we don't have any object. It's only a variable of type person. But if we create an object, we are declaring a second variable called p2 of type person, and we are indicating that we're going to create a new object of type person using the new reserved word. So the effect on the memory is the variable p2 is created, and this variable points to the created object. So an object of type person is created. This object has its own attributes, for example, ID, first name, etc. So in this figure, we can see that first we declare a variable of type person class called p1. We can see that the effect this has on Java memory is that a space is created for this variable called p1. But this variable does not yet have any assigned value, since only the variable was created. In the second sentence, we can observe that in addition to declaring a variable of type person called p2, it is assigned the reference of an object of type person. For the creation of this person type object, the word new is used, followed by the name of the class from which we want to create the object, and finally the parenthesis is the type of constructor that we are going to use to create this object. The concept of constructor will be studied in detail later, but we only think of the constructor as the way in which we want to create our object in an initial way. We can create, for example, a person type object already with the values such as name, last name, etc. Or as in this case, we can simply create the person type object without providing the first and last name values. And then we can change or assign these values to the attributes to our person type object. We must clarify that the primitive types such as int, long, etc. are not objects. Therefore, to declare variables of these types, you don't need to use the reserved word new. Recall that the word new, what it does internally is to request memory space for the creation of a new object, as many objects as we need. However, the memory is finite, and therefore we could receive an error when created too many objects in execution time of our program. In later topics, we will see the handling of errors and how to deal with the most common, such as the lack of memory in Java. In conclusion, a class defines a new type, and an object is an instance of this new type that has already been created previously. We can create as many objects as we need, this with the help of the word new. Using the string class. The string class has a special treatment. It is not a primitive type, the word new is not needed, and for example, we can declare a variable string reading equals to hello world. As we can see, we are not using the reserved word new. If we remember in previous lessons, we mentioned that the string type is a Java class, but with a special treatment, because this type of data is used repeatedly in our programs. So it's possible to omit the use of the word new, and therefore simplify the creation of a variable of type string. Nevertheless, we can use the new word to create string objects, but it's not common to see this code. Both options are valid, but we will omit the use of new most of the time, because the code is simplified. Just don't forget that the string type is a class and not a primitive type. This type of data is the only exception to the rule for creating objects using the new operator. All other classes must use the new operator in order to create an object. We will begin to use this type in our following example, and thus quickly become familiar with the use of the string type in Java.